Hello, and welcome to this presentation on anxiety, how to recognize, cope, and support others in the workplace. My name is Katie Reimer-Dewalt, and I'm a registered provisional psychologist out of Ponoka, Alberta. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement that's been adapted from the College of Alberta Psychologists website. Responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action, it is with respect and in the spirit of reconciliation and truth that Ought and Die's psychological group honors and acknowledges that here in Alberta, Treaties 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, as well as many unsigned treaties, are the traditional and ancestral territory of many diverse Indigenous peoples. Namely, they are the Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, Tsuut'ina Nation, Inuit, and Métis Nation. We acknowledge and give thanks to the many First Nations, Métis Nations, and Inuit peoples who have lived on and cared for these lands for generations, and the many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. We are dedicated to ensuring the spirit of all treaties are honored and respected. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. Okay, so just a picture of myself. As I mentioned, my name is Katie, and I'm a provisionally registered psychologist in Ponoka, Alberta, through Ought and Die Psychological Group. So today, in this presentation, we will talk about what anxiety is and how common it is, some of the common symptoms, when anxiety may become a problem for you, and who you can talk to if it is a problem. We'll talk about what is happening in the brain during anxiety and what purpose it serves. We'll discuss symptoms of panic attacks, what you can do during a panic attack to help, and how you can help someone else who is having a panic attack. Lastly, we'll talk about recommended treatments for anxiety, as well as coping skills and tools for self-care. Excuse me. To start off, we'll talk about what anxiety is and how common it is. So anxiety is caused by our brain and nervous system overreacting to a perceived threat or future worry in an attempt to keep us safe. Anxiety causes a person to avoid potential triggers, and it's often described as a disproportionate worry or fear of a situation. So oftentimes people will describe anxiety as, I couldn't think during that time. I felt really afraid. I had a lot of fear symptoms, even though we can identify that the trigger wasn't really as big of a harm as we felt it was. Anxiety is the most common mental health disorder, so it affects up to 30% of people. At any time, 30% of people have a diagnosable anxiety disorder. The most common of these disorders are specific phobias, so different phobias such as, agoraphobia or fear of heights, different phobias like that, social anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. What are common symptoms of anxiety? So most of us have experienced some of these at some point in our life. Excessive worry, so worrying about something to the point where we're having thoughts that are going around in circles in our head. So we're having some intrusive thoughts and we're not able to get out of that cycle. Feeling wound up or on edge, so we describe this sometimes as nervous energy. Difficulty with concentration, fatigue or difficulty sleeping or remaining asleep. I'll have clients who often describe that they'll have symptoms of insomnia. They may be able to fall asleep fine, but they'll often wake in the middle of the night and be worrying about things and unable to fall back asleep. We sometimes see irritability or anger, so we're feeling that on edge feeling, and it's difficult to cope. We can see physical symptoms such as headache, digestive symptoms, or muscle aches. People will often carry the tension in their facial muscles or their neck or their back. So we'll see more, stressed or strained muscles in those areas, especially the jaw. So anxiety can become a problem for people. So like we said, about 30% of people will have a diagnosable anxiety problem. When is it a problem? So if you're finding it difficult to control the worry, or you're experiencing anxiety most days of the week for 6+ months, so extended period of time, most days. If you're feeling significant stress from the anxiety or it's impairing your functioning, so social functioning, work functioning, other areas of life such as relationships. You notice that you're avoiding situations, so especially social situations, you might be making alternate arrangements to avoid triggers. So I've had clients who, have anxiety or phobia around driving on the highway. So they may have somebody else drive, or they might, take an alternate route. So we're rearranging our life at this point to avoid the trigger. Or we're not participating in activities due to anxiety. So if we have social anxiety, we may be staying home from important life events. So we'll talk about this a bit. So who I can talk to about my anxiety. So your first stop is often the family doctor. The family doctor is highly accessible to people. Most people are able to talk to a doctor or go to a walk-in clinic. They can help redirect you to services. They can provide medication if you feel like that's something that you need to help control the anxiety. You can also call 211 for a list of resources in your area. So anywhere in the province, you can call 211 or text info to 211, and they'll direct you to a list of mental health resources. There's some different options here for community mental health. So these are services that are either free to you or have a sliding scale, so they're low cost. Ponoka Mental Health, Ponoka FCSS, Stetler Mental Health, Camrose Mental Health. You can also visit the Psychologists Association of Alberta website for referrals to private psychologists in your area. So if you have benefits, that's also a good option. And you can speak to your employer about potential benefits for therapy or employee family assistance programs. So EFAPs, or employee family assistance programs, are programs that your employer often will pay for, and you get a certain number of sessions with a private psychologist in your area. So what is happening in my brain during anxiety? I find that this can be really empowering for people to understand the reason behind anxiety and why our brain feels this and exhibits these symptoms.
You know what anxiety feels like. We all do. Everyone experiences anxiety in some way or another. It's something that connects all of us together. Why we feel anxiety and what it really is, that may surprise you. Without anxiety, we'd all be in serious trouble. As soon as your brain senses you're in danger, a little piece of it, called the amygdala, kicks in. It gets your body ready to react. That could mean fight, run away, or shut down. It's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction goes back millions of years to our distant animal ancestors. Animals whose amygdalae were more sensitive to danger were more likely to stay alive and off the menu. Over millions of generations, this developed into the system we all know as anxiety. So you see, anxiety itself is not all bad. But when there's no immediate life or death threat, and your amygdala keeps telling your body that you're in danger, that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between getting eaten and public speaking or failing a test. Human society has only existed for a relatively short time. It's messy and complicated and confusing, and our amygdalae just haven't had time to catch up. So sometimes, when we're in uncomfortable situations, our brains misread the risk and overreact. Our hearts beat faster and we breathe heavily, pulling more oxygen into our bodies. The muscles in our arms and legs tense up and fill with blood. Our skin perspires to cool us down. This would all be great if we needed to fight or run, but instead, we just feel tense and sweaty. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When things trigger our anxiety, sometimes we try to avoid them, like our ancestors avoiding a predator. But that can cause problems when those triggers are important parts of life, like going to school or meeting new people, things that won't just give up and go away. So how does knowing all this help? Well, it starts with remembering what's really going on. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just your amygdala trying to tell you it thinks you're in danger, even if it gets confused about how much danger you're really in. Understanding why we feel anxiety is an important step in learning to manage it.
Okay. Okay, so now we have learned that anxiety, even though it can feel very scary and can be something that is really bothersome in our life, it also has a biological and a place in our lives for protecting us from danger. So the purpose that anxiety serves, of course, is as the video said, keeping us safe and alive. So we need to be able to notice when there's risk in our environments. Anxiety can motivate us, so it can help us to do the things that we need to do, because if we don't do those things, then we don't have a place to live, we don't have food, we don't have those sorts of things. It helps us to stay alert, so it helps us to stay alert in our environment and notice if there's threats, and it also motivates us to solve problems. So there are some good things that anxiety does for us. One of the things that people find most bothersome with anxiety is something called a panic or anxiety attack. So they can be used interchangeably. Oftentimes, we see people showing up in the hospital saying that they feel like they're having a heart attack, and it's sometimes can actually be a panic or anxiety attack because it can feel very much the same. So the feeling of pounding or racing heart, sweating or chills, trembling, difficulty breathing, so tightness in the chest, weakness and dizziness, tingling and numbness, chest pain, and symptoms of stomach upset. So while this feels very real and can feel very much like a heart attack, it's useful to be able to recognize these symptoms so that we're able to remind ourselves, this is just a panic attack. This is just an anxiety attack. We're going to get through this, because that can definitely reduce the duration and the severity of the panic attack. So what are some other things we can do during a panic attack? So something that people find to be helpful is practicing deep breathing. So concentrating on your breath. You can close your eyes, count to 5, whatever works for you, to take some deep breaths in and start to clear our head. So when the amygdala is activated, what happens is that, the fight, flight, and freeze, when that kicks in, our body's getting ready to run away or to fight whatever it needs to fight. So it is sending blood pumping, you're getting extra oxygen into your lungs, so we might hyperventilate. So when we hyperventilate, that's signaling to our body that we're in danger, we need to fight or we need to run. So if we can slow down that breathing, then that can be helpful as well. As I said before, if we recognize the symptoms of the panic attack as they begin, then you can remind yourself that you're safe and it'll pass. So this has happened before. I felt this before. I know this is an anxiety attack. I will feel better soon. Some people find that taking a drink of cold water, holding something cold, opening a window, or other sensory stimuli can be comforting to them. So some clients like to put a weighted blanket on. Some people like to play with a fidget. Any of those sorts of things that are comforting to you can be helpful. Finding something to focus on. So naming the characteristics of an item to yourself. So finding something to focus on your desk or in your car, or as you're sitting in a waiting room or wherever you're starting to have the panic attack. It can be anything. It could be a chair or a pen or your water bottle or whatever it is, and just naming. So my water bottle is it is tall, it's pink, it's round, it's smooth, it's cold. So just going through that, what that does is it helps to reactivate your prefrontal cortex. So the amygdala shuts down the prefrontal cortex. It's hard to access. The prefrontal cortex, of course, is the part of your brain that we use for problem solving and logical thought. So if we can bring that back on board and reactivate it, then we have a better chance of stopping the panic attack. Something that people find really useful is using what's called progressive muscle relaxation. So you can find these all over the internet, short ones, long ones, scripts, YouTube videos. So finding those can be helpful. So what this is doing is focusing on tensing groups of muscles at a time while taking deep breaths. So closing our eyes, taking deep breaths, focusing on first, tensing the toes for 5 seconds, then the legs, then, up to the stomach muscles and upward all the way to your facial muscles. So that can help relax you during a panic attack. We can use visualization. So visualizing a time and place where you're happiest. So closing your eyes and thinking of, where is your relaxing place? Where does your brain want to be right now? Engaging in exercise. So what happens as well when we when we're having a panic attack or when we're flooded with anxiety is that we're also flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. So adrenaline is, of course, what we use to fight or flight. It's what we would use to run away or fight the thing we need to fight. But the problem is there's not actually something that we need to fight or flight from. So we're flooded with adrenaline. It has nowhere to go. So going for a walk, going for a light jog, doing some jumping jacks, whatever's helpful to you can get rid of some of the adrenaline, and it can really be helpful for feeling better. What if someone else is having a panic attack? So, you may have experienced this. Someone else is going through a bout of anxiety. So, what we can do is we can gently acknowledge that they're having a panic attack. So, as we said before, it can feel very real, like a heart attack. So, saying to them, I think what you're having right now is a panic attack. I'm seeing some of these symptoms. Helping them to either go for a walk. So, we talked about light exercise, go for a walk, or sit and breathe deeply. So, breathing with them can be very regulating for some people. Walking with them can be very regulating. Offer comfort items, so offer them that ice water, blanket, something cold, open the window for them, remind them to, maybe you're hot right now, take off your coat, things like that. Being non-judgmental. So I think that most of us can identify with this, feeling stress or panic or anxiety at some point in our lives. So remembering that this happens to everyone. We can't control that anxiety. It's just a reaction of our brain. And helping them to seek medical attention if necessary. So if it's severe, helping them to go to the ER if they need to, helping them to call 211 or 811, helping them to call their therapist or to seek help in that way. So some of the recommended treatments for anxiety. So the good news is anxiety, while it's very common, is also very treatable. And one of the treatments that we use, so the kind of favored treatment is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a useful science-based form of therapy that focuses on understanding our thoughts and behaviors. So part of the reason that I talk to clients about what our brain is doing during anxiety is that being able to identify what's happening gives us some control. So CBT helps clients learn to have more control over their thoughts, which can help reduce anxiety and decrease panic attack symptoms. So it doesn't mean you'll never have another panic attack, you'll never experience anxiety again, but it just means that you have more control over what's happening and you're able to recognize it quicker. Clients learn about helpful versus unhelpful thought patterns and how to change our thoughts. So most of us, when we experience anxiety, we experience racing thoughts that go with that, right? So we're triggered by a situation, um, and suddenly, all of these thoughts. So something we call catastrophizing is very common. So we think of the worst case scenario is going through our head. Something that's part of cognitive behavioral therapy is something we call exposure therapy. So it can be used to decrease anxiety as well, particularly with phobias. So what we do with exposure therapy is that we know that the way to get rid of anxiety, unfortunately, isn't from avoiding the triggers, but actually from engaging with the triggers. So we know that giving our brain evidence that when I experience this anxiety-inducing situation or scenario, I feel a lot of anxiety. But once I start to engage in it, my brain starts to realize that, hey, we're actually not under threat. There's actually not something that's going to kill us in this situation. We're going to be okay. So the goal of exposure therapy is helping clients to kind of face that fear with the goal of reducing anxiety. So reducing the brain's automatic response over time, because once the amygdala learns that this really is an overreaction, we'll start to be able to react in different ways. In cases where therapy alone does not reduce symptoms, you can talk to your doctor about being prescribed anxiolytic, so an anxiety medication. Very common, lots of people take anxiety medications. Most are non-habit forming. We can take them for short term, we can take them for emergency use only, we can take them for long term. They can be combined with antidepressants. They've really come a long way in their ability to be used. So I would recommend that you speak to your doctor about that if that's of interest to you. Okay, so something that is helpful when dealing with anxiety or really just with any stress in your life. So some coping skills. One of the things we can do is called mindfulness. Some people call this grounding. Mindfulness helps bring us back to the present situation. So sometimes people describe anxiety as, a future fear. So we're worrying about things we can't control in the future. So mindfulness helps remind us of that and bring us back. We can use something called the comeback method. So that's when your thoughts start to drift, so they start to go towards the future and all of those worries and anxieties. We can consciously recognize it and say to ourselves, come back, we're not there yet, come back to the situation, what's happening right now in the present. We can use something that's commonly referred to as either the three or the five senses. So it depends on who you are. Some people just use, sight, sound, and touch. And some people prefer to use sight, sound, touch, scent, and taste. But what we're going to do is we're going to look around the room and we're going to look for three things that we can see. So we name those to ourselves. Three things we can touch and what they would feel like, so we name that to ourselves. And then three things that we can hear. Okay, so we're going to do that, and you can do it in different combinations. You can do three, then two, then one. You can do five. You can do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whatever works for you, but it just brings you back to the present moment. We can do a body scan, so similar to progressive relaxation. We're closing our eyes and we're starting at either our toes or our heads, and we're moving up or down our body, and we're noticing where we're tense. We're noticing the sensations in our body. We're noticing what's happening physically for us so that we know the symptoms and we have more control. Mindful breathing, so closing our eyes, taking deep breaths, noticing our body, noticing how it feels in the space. Some people like to do meditation. So there's lots of apps out there for mindfulness. If you're somebody who likes technology, mindful breathing and meditation, there's tons of YouTube videos, so everyone can find what fits for them. So tools for self-care. So self-care is very important. Some of the things that we think about for self-care. So, self-care is definitely, taking a bubble bath, going for a walk and doing all those things, but it's sometimes even a little bit more simple and internal than that. So connecting often with our support system. So making sure that you have people who are in your corner that you can rely on when you're feeling stressed or feeling down. Setting aside time for rest. So making sure that we're getting adequate rest, adequate time to ourselves, adequate sleep at night. Learning to say no and set boundaries. So we live in a society where saying yes to things, we want to be people pleasers, we want to be social people, feels good at the time, but if we are always saying yes to other people, then we're often saying no to ourselves. So we need to balance that need for rest with that desire to do things with others. So setting some boundaries around that. Engaging in something that brings you joy daily. So we often use this, it's called behavioral activations. We often use this with clients who are experiencing depression, but anxiety as well, or just good for anybody. So building things into our daily schedule that we enjoy. So whether that's, reading for half an hour, talking with your family, going for a walk, listening to a podcast, sitting and taking deep breaths, doing some art, watching a show, whatever it is that's bringing you joy. Find something that's meaningful to you. So we want to have meaning and purpose in our lives. So setting goals, making sure that we're doing something that's bringing us meaning. Reaching out for help when you need it. So when you start to notice that things are overwhelming, reaching out to your doctor, your friends, your family, a therapist, a crisis line, whoever it is that you feel comfortable reaching out to. Something else we want to do is we want to eat well, exercise, and limit our caffeine, alcohol, and tobacco intake. So we know that when our whole body is working well as a system and we're feeling well and taking care of ourselves, then we're less likely to have some of these symptoms of anxiety and other mental health problems. Okay, so thank you for watching this presentation today. If you have any questions about anxiety or any other mental health related topics, you can feel free to contact me. So I can be reached by either phone call or text, so 780-312-8722, or the email katie@ottendie.com. Thank you.